Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to a discussion of Iliad by Homer, Book 3. Wanted to go over just first a few ground rules, things that we've covered, a synopsis of what we've covered. Remember that I talked about how this text has what's called chiasmus, balance. And if we're looking at a structure of the Iliad, that the structure is kind of similar to the pediment of a temple. And so here we are at one side of the temple, and it balances with the other side of the temple, with the middle part of the temple being the high point, if you will, of the text. And so book 1 balances with book 24, and book 2 balances with book 23, and book 3 balances with book 22, and so on and so forth. So our section right now of book 3 is balancing with book 22. Like, for instance, if the rage of Achilles starts us off, that rage finds its resolution in book 24. In this section, where we are dealing with Helen reviewing the champions and a little bit of strife and struggle, that is going to balance to some degree what happens in book 24. So let's look at book 24 just briefly to see what is actually being balanced. The text that we want to look at is Homer's Iliad, translation by Robert Fagles. And if for instance, we have, here's the text, if we have our book, which is book 3, Helen Reviews the Champions, this is going to balance out with book 22, which is where Hector and Achilles have a large battle with one another, a lethal battle, pivotal battle. This section then we look for, say, okay, well, is there a battle here as well? And yes, there is. There's balance. Chiasmus, as we call it in Greek. As a quick synopsis, recall that in book 1, we had Achilles getting angry at Agamemnon because his girl was taken away, and he threatens to kill Agamemnon and has to be stopped by Athena, who grabs his hair and controls him like a young pony. And he makes a huge vow that he's not going to join in the war anymore, and he takes himself and all of his soldiers out of the fight. And then in book 2, we have Agamemnon who's testing the troops, and we have Odysseus rallying the troops and beating Thersites over the back, and the armies settle down and rally in order to fight. And we have the story of the Atreidae and all that bloody business that goes on. And that takes us up here now to book 3. Remember that I had brought up themes in the text. There are certainly many themes. There's arete and hubris, pride. Arete, which is glory. In battle. Kleos, which is fame. We have metamorphosis, which is really the theme I think is the most prominent here, and that's change. It's the change from being an immature person to being an adult. And I think that coupled with that is the theme of undermining the gods and goddesses in order to break their hold over our imagination. So to begin with, I talked about last time what was called anachronism as well. And anachronism, anachronos, is things out of time. Homer is writing in the 800s, early 700s, and he's writing about a period that was 400 years prior to him. Let me draw up a map here. This is the world in which he is writing. The world where he is writing is in this coast of Ionia, the Ionian coast, all these different little city-states that have popped up here along the coast. The empire, if you will, that Troy was connected to, this is back during the 1250 BC, the empire that Troy was connected to was the Hittite Empire. And that had collapsed, and this area had collapsed, and most of the Aegean had collapsed. The Mycenaean world had collapsed sometime around the 1200s. And 400 years of dark, they call it darkness, nothing of literacy was produced, and there was evidence of great struggle and battles and the abandonment of cities, things like that. That had occurred for about 400 years. And the trade was beginning to rise again in that area, roughly around the 800s. And the city-states were growing in prominence, and Homer was singing his song for those courts that would hire him. Consequently, he didn't really know, or couldn't have known, things that had occurred 400 years before. Methods of doing things, battle tactics, things like that. And we see an anachronism at the very start of our story. So that anachronism is that it says that the squadrons that come together in two lines, like cries of cranes sweeping across the sky. They come together and they face each other, and then one man comes out and challenges another man, and that other man comes out, and the two guys fight it out mano a mano. That wouldn't have happened. That's that style of fighting, even of large massed armies, was not really in vogue, so to speak, until the time of Homer. The 800s is when the beginning of the phalanx, really. Great book to read on this is the Western Way of War by Victor Hansen. I highly recommend that if you're interested. Prior to this 800s, they fought in small skirmishing units. You had sieges, certainly. You had fighting units that might confront one another here and there, but it was it wasn't a pitched battle sort of thing that went on. Only occasionally did that happen, and then it was a really catastrophic business, like the battle that led to Megiddo. So here we have, in the very opening, the two armies coming together, and then one man challenges another, and they do fight it out mano a mano. So it's an anachronistic business, but we go with it because it's what Homer writes, and it's a poetic thing. The synopsis of what happens: Paris challenges the Achaeans to mano a mano combat. Menelaus picks up the challenge. Paris gets scared. His brother tells him, "Get back in there. Don't be a coward." And he goes back and he fights Menelaus. In the middle of it, battle, Menelaus grabs him by the hair and is dragging him off to the lions to cut his throat. When Aphrodite comes and snips or cuts or whatever, unsnaps the helmet, and the helmet goes flying off, and Paris is safe. And Aphrodite takes him, whisks him away, and drops him into his apartment, and then sends Helen in to him. And we end with Menelaus being all mad, storming around like, "Where's that guy?" And that's the end of the book. So that's just a quick synopsis of what we read or will read. But there are a number of things to note in here. The first thing to notice is about the character of the people. What kind of person is Paris? We get introduced to Paris. We get introduced more or less to Menelaus. We get introduced to Helen and Priam. What is the character of these people? Well, the way that we discover character is we look at certain telltale signs. We look, for instance, at the words that are used by the author to describe that character. We look at the character's actions, what they say, what others say about them. We look at the imagery surrounding that character. All of that contributes to our understanding of what the character is actually like. And we see with Paris that when he is strutting around in front of the army, that he's already displaying something of who he is as a person from the very start. So let's look at that text first. This is in line 20, right, at the very opening of the text. And it says that Paris sprang from the Trojan forward ranks, a challenger, lithe, magnificent as a god. So he's godlike in his appearance. He seems to be divine. He's got the skin of a leopard slung across his shoulders. Now, for us, that might not mean much, but for the ancient world, leopard skin, yeah, you could wear one in battle, as you could wear lion skin, or you could wear, I suppose, a tiger, or you could rhinoceros, I suppose. But leopard skin was always associated with incontinuity, incontinence, which doesn't just mean having to go to the bathroom. It means you can't control yourself, incontinence. Any urge comes up and you follow it. Any thought comes up and you say it. That's the incontinent person. Someone who doesn't govern their actions, doesn't govern their words. So immediately the fact that he is wearing a leopard skin over his shoulder tells us something about him as a character. Second, you see he has a reflex bow, and he has a battle sword and 2 sharp spears. So he's decked out. He's ready for battle. But his being decked out is initially with a bow, and as we see later, the bow is something that's very important in his character in the story. But a bow is also not considered to be a hero's weapon. It's not considered to be the weapon of an honorable fighter. It wasn't for years, even though it was more devastating than the sword. It was not seen as honorable. Probably because you didn't like step up and face your own death. You shoot at a guy from a distance, and what is he going to do? Can't run at you easily. So Paris has a bow. He has the leopard skin, and he's challenging the Argives, right? Strutting around. And as we see, Menelaus sees him parading there with big loping strides. Now, that's, of course, Fegel's words, but Fegels gets a pretty good grasp of the original Greek here when he's conveying it in English. The fact that Paris is parading around, he's pumping his chest, he's flexing, he's yelling out at the other guy, "You can't take me, come on." He's making a show. He's got big loping strides. He's making a show. He's flaunting before the troops, as it says. This tells us something about his character as well. What kind of guy is he? He's the kind of guy who's all talk. He's bluster. He's yelling out challenges to everybody else. Okay, noted. And Atrides then says, Atrides is a reference to Menelaus. Atrides thrilled like a lion, lighting on some handsome carcass. This is wonderful, this Homeric simile, this Homeric comparison. He frequently does this. The comparison adds something to the character and is sometimes funny. Atrides sees Menelaus sees Paris strutting around, and it's like a tiger looking at a carcass. Oh yeah, there's a carcass ready to eat. So Menelaus says, "I'm ready to eat Paris, ready to get him." And he says, "Now for revenge," and he challenges Paris. He comes back at him. And as soon as Paris sees Atrides, as soon as Paris sees Menelaus, he gets all scared. Paris's spirit shook, backing into his friendly ranks. He cringed from death as one who trips on a snake in a hilltop hollow. And the pallor takes his cheeks, and back he shrinks. That's how Paris dissolved again in the proud Trojan lines, dreading Atrides. So it's when he sees somebody who really challenges him, it's as though he had stepped on a snake, right? That tells us something about his character as well. It tells us that he's a lot of bluster, but it's not always legit. He's kind of cowardly, we might say. So he melts back into the ranks, right? As soon as he sees him, he's scared of him. There's more even to it, because it says he recoils like a snake, and then he brings up the line, "Magnificent, brave Paris." Again, at the very beginning of this section, he calls him magnificent, but that's almost ironic. He's being ironic in his description of Paris. Paris is really, oh boy, is he magnificent? He cowardly slunk away like a magnificent coward. It was just magnificent, just how lily-livered and yellow he really was. And then Hector gets mad at him, and we get more about who Paris is by Hector, because Hector he's honorable, and he's noble, and he's strong, and he's courageous, and he's kind of the hero of the story in many ways. Even if he's not the protagonist, he's the hero. And Hector he calls him by names, hoping to call up in him a response called a thumotic response. And we still see this a lot. When somebody's not doing their job or whatever, you say, "Oh, come on, you're better than this. You can do better than this." Or, "Man, you really suck. Nobody's ever going to believe you could do this again. I can't believe I trusted you." And the person hopefully will say, "Oh yeah, I'll show you. I'll do it." That's the hope. Hector is calling him by names, but they're very fitting names. Appalling, right? You're appalling. You're a prince of beauty, not of courage or nobility. You're mad for women. You lure them all to ruin. Would to God you never been born. It's kind of funny, but I wish you hadn't been born, right? You're an outrage. You're a mockery. You're a laughing stock. And he says, you have no pith, no fighting pith. Even though you have handsome limbs, you have no fighting pith, no fighting strength inside of you. And you're a curse to your father, your city, your people, a joy to your enemies, a rank disgrace to yourself. All of which is supposed to get Paris to fight more, but actually is pretty accurate. He is a curse to his father, as we'll see further on in the discussion. And he says, the fine lyre and these gifts of Aphrodite will be no use to you when that man you robbed will show you how strong he is. When Menelaus basically crushes your head, then all these gifts that you have from Aphrodite, the fine lyre and all the rest of it, your long flowing locks, your striking looks, right? Not when you roll with the dust. That's interesting, rolling couple with the dust, because in the Aphrodite sense, it would be rolling coupling in another way. And here he's rolling coupling with the dust because he's dead. That's what Hector says. That's going to happen to you. And boy, the men of Troy are cowards, or they would have decked you out in a suit of rocky armor. They would have stoned you to death for all that you've done. It's just too bad they haven't. Again, the opinion of a good man about Paris shows you something about what kind of character Paris is. And you think that Paris would respond with saying, oh, yeah, I'll show you, because that's a philautic reaction. But Paris, notoriously, is the incontinent man, the man who can't control himself. He's appalling. And so he responds as the incontinent man would respond. Instead of saying, oh, yeah, I'll show you, he says, oh, yeah. What you say is, you're right. Yeah, I am this kind of guy. You're the strong guy. Your heart's always tempered. You're a soldier. You're definitely strong and tough and brave, but not me. No, I'm not. But don't fling in my face the lovely gifts of golden Aphrodite, right? Don't throw that at me, because these aren't to be tossed aside, the gifts of the gods. Whatever the gods give of their own free will, how could we ever choose them for ourselves? Right? I can't help it that I'm strong and good looking and have rippling biceps and pecs, and that my hair is flowing and beautiful, and that I have a chiseled jaw, and that I'm all tan with a spray tan. I can't help that. That's the gods. Well, remember, I was talking about how Homer's undermining gods. In a way, he's doing that here, because there are certain types of people who, even today, pawn off their inability to stand up to themselves, to control themselves, pawn it off on some force beyond their control. The bottle made me do it, or I just couldn't help myself. My heart went boom when I crossed that room and held her hand in mine. I just couldn't help myself. And as long as they do that, they're trapped or enslaved to forces that push them around beyond their control. They are immature. Homer seems to be suggesting that maturity comes by defying those gods and standing up to those gods. Paris becomes an example of what not to do. If we are trying to work towards metamorphosis, we have to know what not to be as well as what to be. And Paris is something which we are supposed to see as, ooh, that's ignoble. That's not good. He says, you want me to fight, right? I'll do it. That's fine. I'll do it. I'll join the fight. So he does, eventually. And during the battle, they fight. They duke it out. His life is in danger, and the minute that it's in danger, Aphrodite comes down and swoops down and saves him. Not Athena, not Hera, not Zeus, not Poseidon, not Ares, but Aphrodite, which says something about Paris, again, what kind of guy he is. And we're going to skip down to that, skip this part about Helen for just a second. And when he is picked up by Aphrodite, he is then set down in his own house. And it's important to note what that is described to be, because here they are fighting. And eventually she picks him up and takes him away. And the line, here it is. The line is that she snapped the rawhide strap and the helmet came off, emptying Menelaus' fist. And he whirls it around, and then back at his man he sprang, enraged with brazen spear, mad for the kill. But Aphrodite snatched Paris away, easy work for God, wrapped him in swirls of mist, and set him down in his bedroom, filled with scent. It's an important little bit. Again, Homer's very subtle in creating these characters, but she wraps him up in mist, takes him away from the nasty, smelly, dirty, awful, evil, painful battlefield, and puts him down in his crib, his nice, neat little pad. And what's his pad like? Well, we don't see much of it, but this little bit that it's filled with scent. His bedroom is filled with scent. He's got the candles going on, you know. He's got the lava lamp. He's got all the couches are covered in leopard skins and zebra skins. He's got the velour chair, you know. We find that his bed is quite magnificent. So he's a lover, not a fighter. And all of this, taking him away and setting him down in his nice, comfortable little room, is supposed to stand in contrast with the suffering and the dying that all the real men are doing out there on the battlefield. Paris is not a likable guy. And as we see further on, even his wife doesn't think that he's very likable. Because when he comes in to visit with her, she's already ticked off at him. It says here in 500, there Helen sat, Helen, the child of Zeus, whose shield is storm and lightning, glancing away, lashing out at her husband. Speaking as a man, I have seen this vision of the storm and lightning look from women. It's a terrifying thing to behold. Truly, if you give a look of storm and lightning, it's a dangerous moment. She is, in this instance, the child of Zeus, not the child of Leda, but the child of Zeus, who is the god of lightning and thunder and terror and storms. And she gives him a look that reflects that, and then she glances away and then lashes out at him, right? So, home from the wars. Sarcasm drips here. She just, you get the sense that she just hates this guy. Oh, would God you died there, brought down by that great soldier, my husband, long ago. How you used to boast year in, year out that you were the better man than fighting Menelaus in power, arm, and spear. So why not go back now and hurl your challenge at Menelaus, dear to Ares, fight it out together, man to man again, huh? Go back, go fight. Wait, take my advice. Call a halt right here. No more battling with fiery-haired Menelaus, pitting strength against strength in single combat. Madness. Oh, he just might impale you on his spear. She just dislikes this guy so much and sees him for the coward that he is and for the loser that he is, and has contempt like you wouldn't believe towards this guy. And again, you'd think Paris would say, wait a minute, babe. Come on, that's not fair. But no, he doesn't do that. He's the incontinent man who can't control himself, has no backbone, no spine. And he says to her, no more, dear one, don't rake me with your taunts, myself and all my courage. This time, true, Menelaus has won the day. I'll bring him down tomorrow, mañana, I'll take him tomorrow. I'm still a pretty good, strong guy, Even we have gods who battle on our side, But come, let's go to bed. Let's lose ourselves in love. Immediately, he's the incontinent man. Let's go and do the thing that I'm good at, which is not battle. And he says a line here, 2 lines, that we see later from Zeus, interestingly enough. Remember that undermining the gods thing I talked about? Never has longing for you overwhelmed me so. And then later, that was nothing to how I hunger for you now. Irresistible longing lays me low. And so they do. And it shows us that Paris is the guy that we don't want to be. But what about Helen? What kind of character is she? Because she's often depicted as being one-dimensional. There are no one-dimensional characters in Homer. All the characters have depth and personality, if we know where to look for it. To different levels, of course, but he's not a guy who's making just a single-dimensional character. So the first thing we want to notice when she comes out, it's the first time we see her in the entire epic. And here's where she is first depicted. Let's see. We'll go up a bit. When first she is depicted, she is seen, here it is, as doing something that ancient world women always did. Here we go, line 150. Iris came on Helen in her rooms, weaving a growing web, a dark red folding robe, working into the weft, the endless bloody struggles, stallion-breaking Trojans and Argives armed in bronze had suffered all for her at the god of battle's hands. This woman, who normally people write off as either being the most beautiful woman in all Greece or else as being just an awful person, is doing what domestic women always were depicted as doing. The good women of Greece or of Ionia would be depicted at their loom weaving. And notice that she's depicted as white-armed Helen, too. That white-armed Helen is it's not just that she was white, it's that wealthy people were depicted as not being tan. It's opposite now, because in our world, if you have a lot of leisure, you can be outdoors and doing outdoor things and skip and hop over the hills. Whereas if you have to work, you have to be indoors and working all the time. If you're poor, you know. But in those days, if you're wealthy, you didn't go outside. And if you were working, or if you were at battle, or if you were a slave, you were tan because you were out under the sun all the time. So the whiter a person was, it was more a depiction of their wealth and status. Kind of like the Chinese with the long fingernails. They didn't have to do any work. So the longer their fingernails, the less work they had to do. Helen is depicted as white-armed, which shows that she is a great status, very high status. But it also shows it's a connection to the imagery that surrounds the goddess statue as well. Because the statue of Aphrodite, the statue of Athena, Hera, they were almost always depicted in alabaster or marble, white stone, because white was connected to the sun and to gold and to divine colors. It was theophanic imagery. So her white-armed status here is not just of wealth, it's also of a connection to the goddess immediately. And she's connected to a decent woman because she's at her loom. And she's not just weaving a web, a robe. It's a red robe, dark red, color of blood, which that's significant. And she's working into it the bloody struggles of the Trojans and Argives that they had suffered all for her at the god of battle's hands. Everything in the ancient world had scenes and patterns and on it, and lots of color in the ancient world. But here she's weaving scenes of the struggles that are going on right in real time, right around her. Because why? Because she can't stop thinking about the fact that I'm guilty of this. I'm the one who started this. I'm the one who has the fault and the guilt and the weight of all this on me. I think it shows somebody who's really a very deep thinker, somebody who's very profound in their reflections on just how, I don't know, guilty they are, responsible they are for what's going on, the tragedy that's going on. She takes on a lot of responsibility, you can say. Even the weight of the world is on her. And Iris calls her out, and she comes out to the walls to see what's going on. It says a yearning, warm and deep, wells up in her heart for her husband long ago, her city, and her parents. So she begins to tear up, crying, because she's remembering that past life. And she's not somebody who's just like, oh, well, they're all fighting for me. I'm just beautiful. I can't help it. No, she's taking responsibility for the fact that all this is going on because of her. And she's trapped. She can't go back to that original world. And not being able to go back to that original world, she's like a prisoner in a gilded cage, yes, but a prisoner. A goddess who wraps herself in shimmering linen, but is still trapped. When she goes out on the walls, all the men are out there, all the old men are out there. And remember, we talked about how this was connected to the Hittite Empire. This is a very wealthy city. These are very powerful gangsters. And all the old men are out there on the walls looking at the battle, judging the battle. And it says, the old men of the realm held seats above the gates. Long years had brought their fighting skills to a halt. They were like eloquent speakers still, clear as cicadas, settled on treetops, lifting their voices through the forest, rising softly, falling, dying away. So they're all commenting on the battle. They're like watching the commentators on the NFL or something, you know. They're all creating strategy. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And in their talks, suddenly they are arrested by the sight of Helen. They see her moving along the ramparts, and they stop talking about the war, and they start murmuring, talking about her, like all these eyes turn to her. You know, imagine that for a minute, that she's a prisoner there. Yeah, she might have come willingly, or she might have been captured, who knows, but she is still trapped in this gilded cage of Troy, and all the people see her all the time and see her as either this terror and this pariah and this plague on their city, or they see her as an object to be acquired, not as a human, but as an object. They say to one another, who on earth could blame them? Them being the people fighting for her. Who on earth could blame them? Ah, no wonder the men of Troy and Argives under arms have suffered years of agony, all for her, for such a woman. Beauty, terrible beauty, a deathless goddess. So she strikes our eyes. But still ravishing as she is, let her go home in the long ships and not be left behind for us and our children down the years, an irresistible sorrow. So all the men, all the old men, all the old gangsters, they all see her and they say, yeah, man, I'd like to have her as part of my household, you know. But let her go home. Stop the war. She's a plague. They see her both as an object and as a plague, which, again, developing the character of Helen, she knows this. She understands this. And she's not aware of their murmuring amongst themselves about her all the time, constantly, 10 years. And then Priam calls her over. Come over here, child. Sit in front of me so you can see your husband of long ago. And Priam is her father-in-law, allegedly, because, you know, she's married to Paris. Priam's her father-in-law. And yet he treats her in a way which is a little off, like she's an object. Like he can command her to do whatever he wants her to do. And she's obedient, right? Here, come closer and tell me the name of that tremendous fighter, right? There's something a little off, a little creepy about it. Probably because he's the old gangster who used to really have it, right? He was a warrior and a conqueror and a seducer of women, and he's an old guy now, but you know, he's still got all this power, so he can do what he wants and say what he wants and command women the way he wants. And so Helen is under his sway. Again, imagine that, being trapped in the city where you can't get out, and the old guys treat you like an object. It's really startling. She begins to name all the characters, and the first one she names is Atreus' son Agamemnon, Lord of Empires, my brother-in-law from my previous marriage. Both a mighty king and a strong spearsman. He used to be my kinsman, whore that I am. Whore that I am. Some people read this as sort of like a throwaway line. I think that this really is how she thinks of herself now. And again, if we're adding to the character, what kind of woman would be thinking of herself as this term, this awful term? What kind of woman would carry the weight of everybody's hate on their shoulders and think that they were the reason for everybody's suffering? It must be a tremendous thing for her to do that. And then it says, there was a world, or was it all a dream? She begins to think about her past life and says, did it ever exist? All the world of happiness, my first love, my first marriage, my first life. Did it exist, or was it just a dream? I don't even know anymore. And then the king, seeing this, breaks in and says, how lucky for Atreus to have you as his wife. Look at all the people that he commands. Tell me, who are these people? And she goes on and tells all these other people. And then we get the passage to flesh out her character finally, where Aphrodite comes to her. And Aphrodite basically has taken Paris and put him into his room filled with scent. And after placing him there, she goes to get Helen and coaxes Helen to go to Paris. So she's dressed as an old woman here. She's disguised as an old woman. And she comes to her and says, quickly, Paris is calling for you. Come back home. There he is in the bedroom, the bed with inlaid rings, this fancy, dancy bed that he's in. He's glistening in all his beauty and his robes. You never dream he's come from fighting a man. You think he's off to a dance or slipped away from the dancing, stretching out at ease. He's oiled and he's got his locks flowing. And he's just the perfect Fabio kind of guy. Don't you want it? Don't you want it, honey? Come on, honey. Come on. And Helen begins to respond. Oh, yeah, that is kind of attractive. But then she recognizes Aphrodite and she gets mad at her. Very interesting passage. She gets mad at her. Says, what are you doing now? You're lusting to lure me to my ruin yet again. Where will you drive me next? Off and away to other grand, luxurious cities, out to Phrygia and Maeonia's tempting country? Have you a favorite mortal man there too? Why now? Because Menelaus has beaten your handsome Paris, and hateful as I am, he longs to take me home. Is that why you beckon here beside me now, with all the immortal cunning in your heart? Well, go to him yourself. You hover over beside him. Abandon the gods' high road and be a mortal. Never set foot again on Mount Olympus. Never. Suffer for Paris. Protect Paris for eternity until he makes you his wedded wife. That or his slave. Now, by the way, you don't talk to goddesses this way. This is absolutely out there. It's really an amazing passage because the gods are the gods. If the generals of Troy and of Achaia are like the gangsters, these are like the uber gangsters, the New World Order gangsters, if you will. They rule over everybody, and you don't talk to them this way. They'll squish your head. And yet Helen is standing up to Aphrodite, which says something about her courage, her nerve, her strength to be able to stand up to a goddess. That's some powerful stuff. And she says, I'm never going to go back. I'm not going to go back. It's wrong, right? Never-ending heartbreak, the torment of my life. My life is torment. I'm not going to do this. Now, we would think that Aphrodite, if she were noble, would say, oh, yeah, it's wrong. I shouldn't do that. You're right. Okay, I'll back off. But she doesn't. Instead, she rounds on her in fury. Don't provoke me, wretched, headstrong girl, or in my immortal rage I may just toss you over, hate you as I adore you now with a vengeance. I might make you the butt of hard, withering hate from both sides at once, Trojans and Achaeans. Then your fate can tread you down to dust. Do what I say, or I will let you go. I am the only thing keeping you alive. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to let you go, and then you're going to get ground into powder. Well, that's not very nice, is it? Aphrodite is not this sweet, cute little frothy goddess, right? She's actually very, very dangerous. That's something we forget. We think of Aphrodite as the goddess in our current era. We think of her as the goddess of love and lust, beauty. But at least in Homer's time, she's not that. She's terrifying. Remember, she's connected to the goddess Kali. They are similar deities, similar to the goddess Astarte in Mesopotamian, similar goddess. And like Kali and Astarte, there is a very dark side to this goddess. The temples of Aphrodite, archaeology tells us, have been shown to have the corpses of little babies in the cellars of the temples, because babies were sacrificed to Aphrodite, newborns especially, because women who had babies out of wedlock would expose the babies sometimes on a hillside, but also might sacrifice them to Aphrodite or expose them on Aphrodite's steps, and the corpses would then be put down below. There's a very dark side to lust, to desire, which is this violence and discounting of human life. And that's essentially what we see here. This goddess who becomes a tyrannical slave driver, who has Helen basically in a chokehold, threatens her to do what she wants or she will crush her. It's a very telltale sign here, and I think it is in some ways the key to seeing Helen's condition. Helen is not just some ditzy blonde. She is a woman who has been trapped or snared in a position that she can't get out of and is now the pawn or the tool of Aphrodite in a terrifying kind of way. So she does go off to be with Paris, shrouded, as it says, shrouded in glinting silver robes, still statuesque, goddess-like, but terrified, right? Even the mighty daughter of Zeus, terrified. Well, so we looked at the character of Paris, and we looked at the character of Helen. I think that Helen is essentially, she's a survivor. She's one who knows her situation is very, very bad and is doing what she can in order to be able to survive. Doesn't make her good, but it certainly makes her more understandable, I think, and certainly more than a one-dimensional, ditzy blonde who's been taking advantage of the situation. There are two stories to bring up in the remaining few minutes that we have left. The first is the story of Leda and the Swan, and I would encourage you to look these up. I'll put them in the liner notes for you. The story of Leda and the Swan is particularly important. I think I have one up here for a tab. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. This story, the Leda and the Swan story, is, and there's a poem too. This story is hard for us because we see this as so impossible and kind of ridiculous and improbable, But let's go over the story real quick. There's a beautiful woman named Leda. She's Queen of Sparta, wife of King Tyndareus. She's seduced by Zeus. Zeus did a lot of this. And Zeus comes down to her in the form of a swan. And she conceives children by Zeus in the form of a swan. And she gives birth to two beautiful golden eggs, and the eggs hatch, and out come two sets of twins, 2 men and 2 women. The twins are Castor and Pollux, or Castor and Polydeuces in Greek, and Helen and Clytemnestra. So that's the birth of Helen. Helen is born by the union of a swan and a beautiful mortal woman named Leda. Now, again, this is for us. This is kind of what, when you look up at the sky, you'll see the image of the swan there in the night sky. The swan in the ancient world was seen as a creature that was beautiful, graceful, elegant. They still are beautiful, graceful, elegant birds. They're quite large. Something divine about them in a way. The whiteness of the swan is something that is powerful to behold. It's connected theophanically. It's connected to the god Zeus, like a lightning flash is all white. The swan is all white, and like the snaky neck of a swan is kind of like the snakiness of a lightning flash. So it's, to some degree, you could say, yeah, I see the connection between the two. But even the idea of Zeus uniting with Leda in the form of a lightning bolt is a little bit odd for us. we have to get over that and say, this is how the ancient world people thought about divine origins, and their mythology included several stories like this. And their gods were frequently depicted as animals. And if we look at it historically, it moves from gods depicted as animals to gods depicted as human animal, the body of a human, head of an animal, as they do in Egypt, for instance. And then later as human, anthropomorphic. So it's not totally without precedent to say that the god depicted as a bird, especially a beautiful white bird like the swan, that makes sense. And his having children with a mortal, that kind of makes sense to a certain degree. The bottom line is just, this is the story. This is what they believed. And whether they took it literally or not, hard to say. But they certainly said, this is the story. This is just how things panned out. One way or the other, what's produced here is two eggs. And the egg was always seen as the origin of the universe, the origin of things. So there's a sort of geometric connection to the circle, and there's also a connection to something which comes much later in history, which is the Mendelian squares. I don't know if they were thinking this at the time, but I think to some degree the mathematics of this works out. Mendelian squares, Gregor Mendel was the father of genetics in our modern world, and he worked with pea pods, looking at pea pods. He was a monk who worked with pea pods in the garden of the monastery. And he postulated that there were traits that were passed on through genes in the plant that controlled the visible traits that you see in the plant. So if the combination of what were called dominant and recessive was of such and such a type, you would get such and such a type of morphology. A trait would appear. Now, modern genetics is much more complicated than this, of course, but Mendelian inheritance suggested you could create what's called a Mendelian square, and here you have capital G, and you have little g, and then you have a combination of the other two squares of capital little and capital little. And the dominant would always show up as a dominant trait, and the little would show up as the recessive trait. So in many ways, what we see with Castor and Pollux and Helen and Clytemnestra is like this. Helen ends up being the dominant, the GG square, and her sister, not so much. So as Helen is just divine and beautiful and perfect in every single way, her sister Clytemnestra gets the short end of the stick, so to speak, where her brothers, Castor and Pollux, are sort of a combination of the two. They're called the Dioscuri eventually, and they go off with Jason and the Argonauts, and eventually are put into the pantheon of gods. But Helen, walking the earth, is a goddess unalloyed, whereas her sister is a mortal unalloyed by divine things. And that gives us the origin of this beautiful woman, Helen. There's a great poem by William Butler Yeats, Leda and the Swan, which I also put in the links. I highly encourage you. It's a good poem. For the sake of time, we'll move past that, though. The other story to tell is the Judgment of Paris. And in brief, this is the cause of the war, but it's connected to Helen. Helen is the most beautiful thing ever. She's like a treasure to own in a way. She's just so gorgeous. And all the men of Greece are worried that this woman is going to cause strife amongst them, because whoever gets her as a wife is going to be a target for all the other men who would want to kill him and take her. So Odysseus comes up with a plan. He says, let's all vow to protect whoever marries Helen, and we'll choose that man by lottery. So they all write their names on pieces of pottery. They put the pottery into a larger pot, and they shake the pot, and whatever piece comes out, that guy marries Helen. Well, they do that, shake the pot, out comes the name of Menelaus, and Menelaus gets married to Helen. All the other men have already sworn to protect whoever marries, and so they're sworn to protect Menelaus and Helen. And whether that was a rigged lottery or not, I don't know. I mean, there's some evidence that maybe Agamemnon wanted Helen, and so he rigged the lottery because he had actually gotten married to Clytemnestra, the ugly sister, so to speak. And he might have rigged it so his brother got Helen. So yeah, okay, you get Helen, and I'll get the other sister. But who knows? Maybe, and maybe that's the cause of his anger at the beginning of the story. Don't know for sure, but maybe. One way or the other, Helen gets married to Menelaus. They live together. They have, I think, a couple kids. And yeah, and then along comes Paris. Well, we've seen what kind of guy Paris is already. And Paris back in Troy was born to Priam, the first and foremost guy in the city, the first guy, the Prius, like Optimus Prime, right? Priam, who's the most powerful guy, his wife, Hecuba, is going to give birth to this kid, and the daughter's Cassandra says, kill that child as soon as he comes out, because she's had a dream that her mother gives birth to a torch on fire, a brazier on fire, that burns everything, as soon as he's born. And so she's like, kill that boy. And they're like, what? Come on, this kid's gorgeous. Look at it. He comes out, he's beautiful. And he grows up beautiful and strong with the hair and the pecs and the, everything oiled down. And he's a danger because women fall for him. And he comes into contact with several wealthy women that fall for him. And there's some hanky-panky and strife in the city. And so his father sends him out to tend the sheep. So he's out of the way. Well, back to Greece for a minute, because we have a wedding between two powerful people, Peleus and Thetis. Peleus is one of the Argonauts. Thetis is a nymph or a goddess. They are the parents later on of Achilles. Sing the Peleus son, the Rage of Achilles. At their wedding, they invite all their relatives. So Peleus invites all of his Argonauts and all his friends and all his mortal relatives, and Thetis invites all the gods and goddesses, except they leave out one goddess named Eris, who is the goddess of discord, because, she comes and she always causes a problem. She steals silver, she gets drunk, picks fights. They leave her out. And instead of coming to the party, she arrives and throws in a golden apple to the middle of the party. And on the apple is written Kallistos, or Kallista probably. And it means for the fairest. Whichever woman here is the most beautiful gets this apple. And of course, all chaos, all Hades breaks loose. And the women all duke it out as to who the fairest is. And when the dust settles, there are three goddesses remaining who are the most beautiful: Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena. And they all go to Zeus and they say, hey, Zeus, you decide who's the most beautiful. And Zeus is like, hey, no, baby, I'm not going to touch that. No way. Let's get a mortal to do it. And so they choose Paris, who's out there tending sheep, as the judge between the three goddesses. I know, right? The goddesses go to him in proper order, and while he's deliberating between the three of them, they each come to him to sweeten the deal, to give him something more. And Hera says, I'll give you Paris if you choose me. I will give you a family life, and I'll give you fame in the city, and you'll have a strong family with lots of kids if you choose me. And Athena says, if you choose me, I'll give you skill in battle, and you'll be renowned among all the troops. So all love you, and you'll be a great warrior if you choose me. And Aphrodite says, I'll give you a girl. Now, we all know what the character of Paris is. And so which one does he choose, right? You got it. He chooses Aphrodite. And Aphrodite says, all right, I am the most beautiful. Yay. And she goes over to get the most beautiful woman in the world. Problem is, that most beautiful woman in the world is already married to somebody else, Menelaus. And Paris is sent by his dad in order to make a peace treaty with Mycenae, because they've been attacking routes and stuff. And And Priam wants to stop that, and he wants to make an alliance with them so that they can profit from the trade without attacking the trade routes all the time. So he sends his son Paris over there to fix the deal. Paris comes over, and while he's over there making a peace treaty with Menelaus there in Mycenae, he falls in love with and seduces Helen. Helen is newly married. She's young. She's in a one-horse town, Mycenae. And Paris is like, hey, let me show you the bright lights in the big city. Our city, our Hittite city, is much more powerful. And it's like New York. It's got lights, and it's got shows, and it's got good food. Come on, let's go. And between that and his good looks, his Fabio good looks, she falls for him, and she runs off. As a young woman, she's like, that's the way to go. I'm going to go with him. And she runs off to the city. And of course, immediately, all these men who have sworn to be protecting Menelaus and Helen, they agree to come and attack Troy. So Helen is really the face that launches 1,000 ships. Now, that's all great in a poetic way. It's wonderful poetry, wonderful mythology, but it's not very practical. One could say that there are other reasons, perhaps, for this event being what it is. One reason, if we go back to the map for a minute, is that the city of Troy, as you see here, falls at this point right as we enter into what's called the Bosporus and then the Black Sea. And so trade routes that would go on to the east, way over here, the trade routes would trade with the eastern countries, which later become China, part of the Silk Road thing, and they would be trading for spices and for silks and for all sorts of treasures of all kinds, bringing them back and making a fortune for themselves, trading with both the Aegean area and then down with Egypt. And the cities along this route would have charged tolls, either to put your ship in for a safe harbor, or else to take you beyond the rapids, or else to protect you from bandits that might appear suddenly. Nice route you got there. Shame if something happened to it. So these cities that were already trading with the Hittite Empire and were trading with people around the Aegean also made a lot of money, a lot of capital, by basically controlling the trade route into the Black Sea. It is possible that the war, the Trojan War, the actual Trojan War that occurred in the 1200s, might have been as a way to attack this wealthy city, which had made itself a target by being so wealthy. It's a possibility. Certainly, when the excavations of Heinrich Schliemann occurred in the 20th century, he found this hill called Hissarlik, which is there at the plain of Troy. And Hissarlik, all the locals said that's where Troy was. And he cut down right down the middle of the thing, just right through the hill. And he was hoping to find Troy at the bottom of the hill. And instead what he found was that there was one level after another, after another, after another, after another, like a sandwich or something, or like a layer cake. And Troy was, I think, number 7 in that series. The actual Troy of the 1200s was number 7, I think. But what he did find was that the city had been sacked and built and sacked and built and sacked and built for thousands of years, which showed that it was a very high priority target, which could also rebuild itself because of its wealth, which indicates that maybe the war that we're talking about might not have been due to Helen, might be due to the fabulous wealth that could be acquired from sacking a city like Troy. Helen, in that case, could then be a personification or a metaphor for that fabulous wealth that awaited for all those pirates that wanted to get together as a biker gang might, and attack that city. That's a possibility. Another possibility, which is a final thought here, is that in the ancient world, when you sacked a city, you would take its gods, its statues, its images, and you take them back to your city. Why? Because in the ancient world, apparently, they didn't think of their statues as representing their gods. They thought of their statues as their gods. To take the statue was to take the god. I mean, if they take your statue, why not just build another statue? Why go and shed blood? That doesn't make any sense, right? Just make another one. But no, they would go to war in order to get that statue back because that statue was the god, or that image was the god. And that happened quite frequently, apparently. There's apparently a number of documented cases of people attacking another people because their gods had to be returned to where they were supposed to be. Well, it could be that Homer is personifying that. Maybe Helen is a personification of that deity that was stolen from the Achaeans and now is being brought back, stolen by this wealthy and powerful city of Troy, and now is being brought back. Maybe. But Homer writes it as it's a woman, and a beautiful one, and a strong, guilt-ridden, reflective woman. And we'll go with that because that seems to be the best route so far as we can tell for now. Besides, it fits our story. Just as Paris is a character we should not want to be because we're in a process of metamorphosis along with Achilles, so Helen is, in a way, someone we should not want to be. Despite the fact that she has a nobility about her and a beauty and a strength and a courage, she has put herself in a situation which is imprisoned, trapped, captive. We don't want to be that. We want to be the butterfly that soars. Well, that's enough for now. Next time when we get together, we'll tackle book 4. We'll see a little bit more about the development of the story of Metamorphosis, but we'll also see some really good combat. This is book 4, The Truce Erupts in War, and we'll see that next time we meet. For now, thanks very much for joining me. Sorry about the delay, but thanks very much for joining me, and I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope that this was benefit to you, and hopefully furthered your understanding of the text. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me. If you have comments or suggestions, I'm open to those as well. Until next time, folks, thank you very much. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.